Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a true story that genuinely, literally defies belief. We're looking at the absolute epic deception engineered by Bernie Madoff. You know, the bookie man might not be real, but for thousands of investors, just hearing the name Bernie Madoff is enough to send a chill right down their spines. So how on earth did he pull off this monumental fraud right under the noses of regulators and the entire financial industry? Let's get right into it. We're jumping straight to the dramatic climax here. Picture this, it's December 2008. The global financial markets are in an absolute freefall, right? Panicked investors are desperately trying to pull their money out, just looking for any kind of safety. And Madoff's investors, they requested a combined withdrawal of $1.5 billion. The problem? He only had $300 million sitting in the bank. That right there is the catastrophic, mathematically unsolvable equation that finally doomed him. It exposed a multi-billion-dollar lie and landed him a 150-year prison sentence.
Section 1, History's Biggest Financial Crime.
So what exactly are we looking at here? By definition, a Ponzi scheme is basically a scam where earlier investors are paid off using the funds from new investors rather than from actual legitimate profits. Now, you might be thinking this all started as some grand evil master plan, right? Well, actually, it didn't. Back in 1960, Madoff had a totally legitimate market-making business. His father-in-law had been referring clients to him, but then Madoff made a bad trade. He lost a good chunk of money, and he simply couldn't stomach owning up to that failure to his father-in-law's friends. So he covered it up with fake trades. That's it. One single refusal to admit defeat just snowballed into an absolute global catastrophe. Section 2, Mechanics of the Fraud. Let's look at how he actually did it. Okay, so Madoff hired this bond whiz named David Kugel for the legitimate side of his business. Kugel was an absolute expert at what's called convertible bond arbitrage. Basically, this means buying a cheaper stock or bond in one market and simultaneously selling it for a profit in another. It's totally legal, and it relies on these microscopic price discrepancies. Really brilliant stuff. So Kugel would execute these super complex trades, and Madoff asked him to share the exact details on index cards with a bookkeeper named Annette Bongiero. Fast forward a year later, and Kugel opens a personal account with Madoff's supposedly exclusive advisory business. But when Kugel looked at his personal monthly statement, he noticed something crazy. The details were eerily familiar. They were his exact highly complex arbitrage trades, just with different volumes and dollar amounts. As supervisory special agent Paul Roberts pointed out, Kugel knew immediately that the whole thing was a fraud. These were fake trades. Why? Because arbitrage trades back in the 1970s were time-sensitive literally down to the minute. Once Kugel made the real trade, the opportunity was gone. Seeing those exact trades repeated perfectly on his paper statement meant Madoff was just copying historical data. They were faking it using real financial models. Now here's the kicker. Kugel stayed quiet, took a massive salary, and unwittingly gave the whole firm this incredibly valuable air of legitimacy. Meanwhile, that bookkeeper, Annette Bongiorno, her method for faking the numbers was shockingly unsophisticated. Seriously, she literally just read old editions of the Wall Street Journal, picked out the best performing stock of the previous month, completely made up a share purchase amount, and recorded a massive fake gain for the client, just like that. As one FBI agent put it, everybody's a financial genius with 20/20 hindsight. Section 3, the 1992 SEC crisis. Remember Madoff's father-in-law? Well, his accounting firm, which was renamed Avellino and Bienes, was feeding clients directly into Madoff's scheme. In 1992, the SEC actually investigated Avellino and Bienes, and this led to a truly terrifying realization for Madoff. Avellino and Bienes was essentially running its own unregistered Ponzi scheme right on top of his. Because both sides were lying, their monthly statements obviously didn't match. Avellino and Bienes were claiming completely different financial strategies, and their account balances were off by more than $100 million compared to what Madoff had on his books. If the SEC had compared those two sets of fake statements, the entire house of cards would have collapsed right then and there. To survive this, Madoff had to order a massive fire drill. His staff scrambled, literally working to forge 3 entire years of fake financial statements just to perfectly match the lies Avellino and Bienes had told the SEC. And somehow it worked. The SEC accepted the paperwork, but they did order Avellino and Bienes to shut down and return all the client money. Now, that was a $440 million problem that Madoff absolutely did not have the cash for. He was desperate. He borrowed stock from a rich client, used it as collateral for a loan, and wrote the checks. But here is the absolute craziest part of this whole thing. Because Madoff was viewed as this sort of Wall Street savior who efficiently paid everyone back, up to 98% of those exact same clients took their checks and just reinvested them directly with Madoff. You can't make this stuff up. Section 4. Fooling the auditors. So to manage this massive influx of fake trades, Frank DiPasquale, who actually started out there as an 18-year-old errand boy, came up with a new strategy based on what's called split strike conversion. It's a real legitimate strategy where you buy stocks and then hedge the purchase by trading options. Now, in the real world, it doesn't actually make much money in the long term, but on paper, with completely fake numbers, it looks incredibly profitable. To hide this massive $7 billion fake operation from SEC reporting requirements, DiPasquale would simply pretend to sell all the stocks at the end of the month and then reinvest the money into audit-proof U.S. Treasury bills. But when the SEC finally came knocking in 2004, Madoff needed a literal mountain of physical proof. Enter the computer boys, programmers George Perez and Jerome O'Hara. The extreme physical lengths these guys went to were just astonishing. You see, the Depository Trust Company, or DTC, keeps records of every stock traded. The computer boys actually got their hands on real DTC statements, hired a separate programmer just to perfectly copy the unique font they used, and then literally held thousands of forged statements up against sunlit windows to make absolutely sure they matched the originals perfectly. It was a painstakingly manual, absolutely massive fraud. But there was one massive, absolutely critical flaw in all this paperwork. Whenever you trade a stock, there has to be a counterparty, right? An actual entity, usually a financial institution, sitting on the other side of that trade. Since Madoff's numbers were entirely made up out of thin air, there were absolutely no real counterparties. If the SEC verified even just one single trade with a counterparty, the game was completely over. So, how in the world do you beat that? Well, with a completely brazen psychological trick. Madoff knew the SEC was a government agency, and like all government agencies, they were working on a pretty strict budget. So he bet his entire freedom on the assumption that if his team randomly assigned European and foreign counterparties to all those fake trades, the SEC auditors wouldn't get the budget approval to make expensive international phone calls to verify them. And guess what? He was completely right. Not a single foreign institution was ever contacted. And if that wasn't enough, add an unbelievable stroke of sheer dumb luck. During one audit, the SEC investigators accidentally left their briefcase right in Madoff's office overnight. No joke. Madoff and DiPasquale opened it up, found the exact list of questions the auditors were planning to ask the very next day, and realized they didn't have the paperwork for one specific question. So they kept their staff up all night forging the necessary documents. Through this insane combination of brazen deception and sheer luck, Madoff successfully passed 5 different SEC audits in just 2 years. Section 5. The 2008 collapse. Which brings us right back to where we started at the beginning of this explainer. $1.5 billion in withdrawal requests, and only $300 million left in the bank. The math finally broke. On December 10, 2008, at the firm's Christmas party of all places, Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, finally confronted him. Back at Madoff's Manhattan apartment, he delivered this absolutely chilling quote to his family. "I'm running a Ponzi scheme and we're out of money." His sons immediately cut ties and reported him. The very next day, the FBI showed up at his door, Madoff was arrested, and this nearly 5-decade-long charade finally came crashing down. Section 6. The aftermath and legacy. Now, the ultimate fates of his co-conspirators definitively destroy the whole myth that Madoff was just a lone wolf. Frank DiPasquale realized the walls were closing in, so he flipped. He spent 6 weeks on the stand detailing exactly how everyone was involved. Peter Madoff, the chief compliance officer who took over $15 million, got 10 years in prison. Bookkeeper Annette Bongiorno got 6 years. The computer boys got 2.5 years each. As for DiPasquale himself, he actually died of lung cancer just months before he was due to be sentenced. The bottom line, they were all in on it. But the most complex, heartbreaking tragedy here really lies with the victims. Recouping the billions has been an absolute legal nightmare. Now, direct investors had some protection, up to $500,000 from the SIPC. But then came the shock of the clawbacks. Listen to this. If you were a client who unknowingly withdrew more money over the years than you initially put in, the SIPC actually sued you to get that money back so they could distribute it to others. Imagine thinking your money is perfectly safe, only to wake up and be told you owe millions. And it gets worse. Those second-level victims, the people whose retirement funds or charities secretly invested their money into Madoff feeder funds without them knowing, they were entitled to zero direct protection. They were forced to rely on a limited DOJ compensation fund that was just funded by seized assets. The legacy of this whole case is just profound. The FBI actually notes that it made Ponzi scheme a household term and fundamentally changed how we view our financial security. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question for you. Do you know exactly where your retirement funds are actually sitting today? Are they with a trusted institution or wrapped up in some feeder fund you've never even audited? It is definitely a question worth asking. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.